He's been called a complete psychopath by a top DEA official.
You want to talk about a country in decline? You have the cartels controlling a lot of part of your southern border.
All right, imagine this. One of the Sinaloa Cartel's most ruthless and feared sicarios, known as El Nini, suddenly finds himself in handcuffs. As he's carried away by law enforcement, you can almost feel the shockwaves rippling through the cartel's ranks. But it gets crazier. On May 25th, El Nini was extradited to the US to face justice. And let me tell you, this is a massive deal.
He will be facing drug, gun, and witness retaliation charges. And according to the Justice Department, full name Nestor Isidro Perez Salas, also known as El Nini, was successfully brought into the US yesterday.
You see, El Nini's arrest isn't just bad news for him. His capture and subsequent extradition has now set off a chain reaction that could have some pretty devastating consequences for communities across the US and Mexico. How? Well, in this video, we'll explore the shocking details of El Nini's rise and fall, the inner workings of the Sinaloa Cartel's fentanyl trade, and the urgent steps needed to confront this escalating crisis. And trust me, you've never seen anything like this before. November 22nd, 2023 was a day like any other in Culiacan, the heart of Sinaloa Cartel territory. The sun beat down on the dusty streets, and the people went about their business, never knowing when the next burst of cartel violence might erupt. But on this particular Wednesday, something big was about to go down. On that day, El Nini was sitting pretty. As the head of security for the Chapitos wing of the Sinaloa Cartel, he thought he was untouchable. He had spent years building a reputation as one of the most brutal assassins in the game, feared by his enemies and respected by his allies. But what El Nini didn't know was that the net was closing in. For nearly 3 years, Mexican and US authorities had been on his trail, determined to bring him to justice. They knew that taking down El Nini would be a major blow to the cartel, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. The US State Department had even put a $3 million bounty on his head, a testament to just how badly they wanted him off the streets. El Nini's reign of terror, it seemed, was about to come to an end. So on that fateful day, the Mexican National Guard, acting on a tip, rolled into Culiacan in force. They knew that El Nini would be heavily armed and likely surrounded by his loyal soldiers, so they came prepared for a fight. But in the end, there was no shootout, no dramatic standoff. The National Guard caught El Nini by surprise, and he was taken into custody without a single shot being fired. The once untouchable assassin was suddenly just another prisoner, his fate now in the hands of the justice system. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland wasted no time in calling for El Nini's swift extradition to face charges north of the border. President Joe Biden and Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador both praised the operation as a shining example of international cooperation in the fight against the cartels. But for the people of Culiacan and for the countless victims of El Nini's brutality, the arrest was more than just a political victory. It was a moment of justice, a glimmer of hope in a world too often dominated by violence and fear. The road ahead would be long, and the Sinaloa Cartel would not go down without a fight. But for now at least, people could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that a monster had been taken off the streets, and that was worth celebrating. Nestor Isidro Perez Salas, better known as El Nini, wasn't just some low-level thug.
He's been called a complete psychopath by a top DEA official, and now this top assassin for Mexico's Sinaloa drug cartel has been extradited here to the US.
He was the leader of the notorious Los Ninis faction, the Sinaloa Cartel's bloodthirsty enforcement arm. This guy and his clique were known for sickening acts of torture and violence. We're talking levels of brutality that are hard to even comprehend.
These are people who gave fentanyl to a man, watched him die, and then sent that same batch of fentanyl to the United States. They know that they are poisoning and killing Americans. They just don't care because they make billions of dollars doing it.
See, the Sinaloa Cartel isn't just dabbling in fentanyl. They're flooding the US with this lethal synthetic opioid. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin and a key driver of skyrocketing overdose deaths in America. It's pretty much the cartel's main cash cow, and sicarios like El Nini play a critical role in keeping that drug pipeline flowing through sheer violence and intimidation. But will El Nini's arrest really cripple the cartel? These guys are resilient, creative, and they have a deep bench of ruthless sicarios who are more than ready to step up. If anything, the power vacuum left by El Nini could lead to even more violence as rivals battle it out. And the flow of fentanyl isn't going to stop. After all, there's just too much money to be made.
Last year, U.S. Drug Enforcement agents seized more than 10,000 pounds of fentanyl powder, enough to kill every single American.
Still, this is an important victory in the war on drugs, even if it's just one battle. Law enforcement is showing they're still in the fight and can land some heavy blows against the cartels. El Nini's arrest also reminds us of the staggering human toll of the fentanyl crisis, the lives lost, the families shattered, the communities gutted, with overdoses claiming nearly 200 American lives every single day.
Hospitals are forced to provide billions of dollars of uncompensated care. Fatal drugs like fentanyl are now flooding our streets.
This increase in narcotics trafficking is not only causing loss of life, but also a huge strain on our criminal justice system, driving our crime numbers and placing extreme pressures on jail capacity, addiction services, and mental health services, which in most cases we already lack.
So while we can celebrate El Nini's extradition as a win, we shouldn't call it a day just yet. The Sinaloa Cartel is still a powerhouse, and fentanyl is still pouring over the border. But for now, we can take a moment to appreciate the hard work and bravery of the men and women who made this arrest possible. They're the ones on the front lines of this deadly struggle. Now, let's take a closer look at what El Nini's downfall means for the Sinaloa Cartel, the fentanyl trade, and the chaos brewing at the US-Mexico border. Trust me, this story is just getting started. To understand why El Nini's capture and extradition to the US is such a big deal, we need to talk about the current state of the Sinaloa Cartel. And that means diving into the twisted world of the Los Chapitos, the sons of notorious kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who took over after his own extradition. See, when El Chapo was finally captured and shipped off to the US in 2017, a lot of folks thought it would cripple the cartel. This was the guy who built an empire and achieved near mythical status as an untouchable narco lord. But as it turns out, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. El Chapo's sons, Ivan, Jesus, Joaquin Jr., and Ovidio, were more than ready to step up and fill their father's intimidating shoes.
Even though their father is believed to have dozens of children, these four were groomed early to take over his expected absence. Now, with El Chapo doing life here at the Supermax prison in Colorado, they are in charge and in demand by American authorities.
Except Los Chapitos didn't just want to maintain the status quo, they wanted to make a name for themselves as well. So they set their sights set on an entirely new goldmine.
The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of the deadliest drug our country has ever faced. And they are responsible for the massive influx of fentanyl into the United States.
While El Chapo focused mainly on traditional drugs like cocaine and heroin, his son saw the potential in this synthetic opioid. It was cheaper to produce than heroin, easier to smuggle thanks to its potency, and in high demand thanks to America's raging opioid epidemic. So, Los Chapitos set out to corner the fentanyl market. They oversaw the construction of clandestine labs, churning out fentanyl-laced pills and pure fentanyl powder, often using chemicals sourced from China, and the scale of production was staggering. These guys were pumping out tens of millions of pills and flooding the US drug market.
The pills come in a rainbow of colors to look like candy.
That at least 50% of the pills were counterfeit, mimicking well-known American drugs, and some came in sealed bottles.
Fentanyl has proven to be a diabolical game changer for the cartels.
Of course, any major shift in the drug trade is going to cause some turmoil. Not everyone in the Sinaloa Cartel was thrilled with Los Chapitos' new direction. It led to power struggles and internal conflict, with factions competing for control. El Nini and his Los Ninis crew found themselves right in the middle of this cartel civil war. As a top sicario for the cartel, El Nini's job was to maintain order through brutality. He oversaw a network of assassins and foot soldiers, tasked with eliminating rivals, silencing snitches, and sending a message to anyone who dared challenge Los Chapitos' authority. and the bloodshed was massive, even by cartel standards.
Gang members paralyzing traffic with spike strips, charred tractor trailers lining the highway.
They are finding several heads in public parks, arms and legs in trash bags, bodies wrapped in blankets outside their homes or next to schools.
Meanwhile, fentanyl kept pouring into the U.S., leaving a trail of bodies and broken lives in its wake.
I have had patients die. I've had patients whose family members have died, and all of these people are children, brothers, sisters, moms, dads, family members, and they're all loved. And these deaths are often unexpected and tragic.
The numbers are genuinely horrifying. In 2021 alone, over 70,000 Americans died from synthetic opioid overdoses, mostly fentanyl. That's a life lost every 7.5 minutes, and it's only getting worse. This skyrocketing life toll finally forced U.S. authorities to get serious about taking on the Sinaloa Cartel's fentanyl operation. They started specifically targeting Los Chapitos and their inner circle, slapping them with indictments and offering hefty rewards for information leading to their arrest. That's where El Nini comes in, as a key player in the cartel's fentanyl trade and one of Los Chapitos' top enforcers. He became a high-value target. His arrest and subsequent extradition are a significant notch in the DEA's belt and a big blow to the cartel's operations. But let's be real, this is far from a knockout punch.
I think it's important to remember, anytime we take out a cartel member, there are 5 or 6 that pop up in their place. So
Los Chapitos still have plenty of sicarios at their disposal, and the fentanyl trade is way too lucrative to abandon. Still, it's a start. It shows that U.S. law enforcement is finally starting to treat the fentanyl crisis with the urgency it deserves. But the fight against fentanyl isn't just about busting down lab doors and slapping cuffs on bad guys. It's also about addressing the root causes of America's addiction crisis, like overprescription of opioids, lack of access to addiction treatment, and the hopelessness that drives people to use in the first place. And then there's the whole issue of border security, because as long as there's high demand for illicit opioids in the US, the cartels will find a way to get them in. That's the dark reality of the drug trade. Speaking of the border, El Nini's extradition comes at a time of serious crisis and controversy along the US-Mexico frontier. The level of illegal border crossings is breaking records, fentanyl smuggling is rampant, and political tensions are sky high. When it comes to the fentanyl crisis, you can't talk about the Sinaloa Cartel without talking about the US-Mexico border. This is the front line in the war on drugs, where the product meets the pavement. And right now, that front line, a boiling pot of chaos. Illegal border crossings are at an all-time high, with over 2 million encounters in 2022 alone. Border Patrol agents are overwhelmed, detention facilities are bursting at the seams, and political tensions are through the roof. Republicans are blaming Biden's policies for the surge.
Since Biden took office, he has admitted into our country an illegal population the size of 8 states of the size of North Dakota.
You want to talk about a country in decline? You have the cartels controlling a lot of part of your southern border.
While others point fingers at root causes like poverty and violence in Central America.
Well, we feel like it's a very problematic move that's based more in politics than what the actual needs are of the community and really what needs to happen around immigration right now.
But while everyone's busy playing the blame game, the cartels are taking full advantage of the chaos. They're using the flood of migrants as cover to smuggle massive quantities of fentanyl into the US. We're talking about shipments hidden in vehicle compartments, dissolved in liquid to be reconstituted later, even pressed into pill form to look like legitimate pharmaceuticals.
I won't give you numbers, but it's more than people realize. Just like the bananas come in, or the oranges, or shoes, at the end of the day, it's a business like any other, and if there's demand, you have to be there to serve it.
The amount of fentanyl being seized at the border is staggering. In 2022, U.S. Customs and Border Protection confiscated over 14,000 pounds of the stuff.
Marcaje positivo. Estos aseguramientos son muy frecuentes. Actualmente se realizan de 2 a 3 operativos por semana y en la mayoría de las ocasiones son positivos.
And that's just what they caught. Who knows how much more is slipping through undetected, which brings us right back to El Nini and his peers. Their job is to ensure the product keeps flowing by any means necessary. That means bribing or threatening border officials, silencing potential snitches, and eliminating anyone who gets in the way. And the level of violence and intimidation is off the charts.
Mexico is experiencing a sharp rise in violence. Some of the most notable examples in recent weeks include a series of roadside bombs in the state of Jalisco that left 4 police officers dead.
But it's not just the border itself that's feeling the impact of the fentanyl trade. The border towns and communities on both sides are being ravaged by cartel violence and corruption. Innocent civilians are caught in the crossfire of turf wars and revenge killings. Local police are outgunned and outmatched. It's a humanitarian crisis that often gets overlooked in the political debates about border security. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Why don't we just shut down the border completely? Build the wall, send in the troops, whatever it takes to stop the flow of drugs. But here's the reality. As long as there's demand for fentanyl in the US, the cartels will always find a way to supply it. Sealing off the border entirely is a logistical impossibility, and even if we could, it would devastate legitimate trade and wreak economic havoc on both sides.
So they're constantly looking for new routes, new avenues to get their drugs to wholesale markets and ultimately consumer markets.
That's not to say border security isn't important. Of course it is. But the US can't just focus on the supply side of the equation. They also need to address the demand side, the opioid addiction crisis that's fueling this whole catastrophe.
The cartels are trying to make the substance more addictive. They're trying to create more customers, and in the process, they're bringing more death to Americans.
Looking into this whole ordeal, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Fixing things will be an uphill battle. El Nini's extradition has already set off an internal struggle within the Sinaloa Cartel. With a power vacuum at the top and rival factions vying for control, the level of violence along the border could even skyrocket, which can only mean dire implications for both Mexico and the US. When news of El Nini's extradition hit the streets of Culiacan, the Sinaloa Cartel's stronghold, you could practically hear the gunfire from rival factions jockeying for power. After all, every time a major player like El Nini gets taken off the board, it creates a power vacuum. And in the dog-eat-dog world of the cartels, a power vacuum means one thing: violence and destruction in the streets. Now, you might be thinking, why would the cartel turn on itself? Aren't they all on the same team? But the truth is, the Sinaloa Cartel is less a unified organization and more a loose federation of criminal gangs. Yes, they cooperate when it comes to moving product and making money, but at the end of the day, every faction is out for itself. With El Nini out of the picture, his Los Ninis crew is suddenly without a leader. That makes them vulnerable to rivals who see an opportunity to expand their turf and influence. The biggest threat to Los Ninis right now is another Sinaloa faction run by the Los Salazar. These guys have been chomping at the bit to take over El Nini's territory and routes for years. They smell blood in the water and they come circling like sharks. But Los Ninis aren't just going to go down without a fight. They're proud, they're loyal to El Nini, and they're not about to let some upstart crew muscle in on their action. So what do? They start arming up, calling in favors, and getting ready for war. And as we all know, when two cartel factions go to war, it's not a pretty sight. We're talking about all-out urban combat with assault rifles, grenades, and even rocket launchers. Culiacan starts to look more and more like a war zone, with burning vehicles, bullet-riddled storefronts, and bodies left out in the streets as a twisted warning to others.
The town has become a place where these two gangs clash.
When the war between the cartels began, a lot has happened. They killed my son and my father. And before that, I lost a brother. He was 14, 15, and then the other brother.
Now, you might be thinking, that's Mexico's problem, right? Why should we care? But here's the thing. Cartel violence doesn't stop at the border. These battles have a way of spilling over into US territory, especially in border cities like El Paso and San Diego.
Oh my God, they have guns. Jesus. Go, please.
Think about it. The cartels rely on their US supply chain to move product and money. When that supply chain gets disrupted by infighting, it can lead to desperate and dangerous behavior on the US side. Cartel members start fighting over scraps, settling scores on American soil. Innocent civilians get caught in the crossfire. We saw this happen just last year in Nogales, Arizona, also known as the world's narco tunnel capital.
Just out of nowhere, gun battles all night. I've seen pictures of cars shot out right in front of where just, a month ago I had been carrying books and everything in for the kids to use.
Two cartel-linked factions got into a shootout right on the main drag, sending bullets flying across the border into the US. And it's a miracle no innocent bystanders were harmed. And it's not just the violence that spills over, it's the corruption too. As the cartels get more desperate, they start leaning harder on their American contacts to help them out. That means more bribery, more threats, more infiltration of law enforcement and government agencies. We've seen Border Patrol agents, local law enforcement, even judges and politicians get caught up in cartel corruption.
But now that Mexico's former top cop is behind bars, the attention turns to the man who got away. A case that further proves corruption can rise all the way to the top.
Prosecutors called in former members of the cartel to testify against Luna. They claimed he received more than $200 million in bribes.
And while some do it for the money, others will do it out of fear for their family's safety. But the end result is the same. The cartels start to erode the very institutions we depend on to keep us safe. This is the hidden cost of the fentanyl crisis, the way it destabilizes communities on both sides of the border. It's not just about overdoses and addiction, as terrible as those are. It's about the erosion of civil society, the corruption of our institutions, and the unraveling of the social fabric. As we've seen, the arrest and extradition of Nini is a major victory in the war against the Sinaloa Cartel and the scourge of fentanyl trafficking. But it's also a sobering reminder of the long road ahead. The cartels are not going to give up their billion-dollar empires without a fight, and the demand for opioids in the US shows no signs of slowing down. So the question is, what happens next? Will Nini's downfall be the beginning of the end for the Sinaloa Cartel, or will they simply adapt and come back stronger than ever? Can law enforcement and policymakers on both sides of the border find a way to work together to address this crisis, or will bureaucracy and politics continue to get in the way? I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know where you think this goes from here. And if you found this video informative, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the dark world of the cartels. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe.